What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Streckbine, joined always by my main man, Steven Thompson. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers obviously hunting for a quarterback. It is the only thing that anybody wants to talk about, but there is some developments that I think are, well, rather interesting. And then another name we'll dive into that maybe a little bit less interesting, but they got to toss it out and new quarterback options emerge on the daily when you're going through an offseason like the Pittsburgh Steelers are. Meanwhile, we got to finish it off with some Kenny Pickett talk, because at this point, the question has to be asked. Are we giving this guy a fair shot, or have we given up on Kenny Pickett a bit too early? We'll dive into all that, plus a little bit more. Make sure to find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. It is a beautiful day here in the Berg. Been a beautiful week here in the Berg. Anybody who watched Pitt and the Penguins last night didn't have a beautiful night, but that's what you were doing. How are you, my friend? How you feeling after last night's Wake Forest game?
Not great. Especially, it's tough to have a 9:00 game anytime there's a 9:00 game.
Yes.
It's even worse when it ends in a blowout.
Yes.
That's just no fun for anyone. So yeah, it was not a particularly fun evening for sports in the city of Pittsburgh last night. It was not very fun.
I can only imagine it's worse when you have to cover it and when you have to stay up until midnight plus to talk about how bad a team is. So,
well, I had to monitor Justin Fields, all his social media, like who he's following, who he's not. So that also made for a late night. I did not get much sleep. I
feel like at that point you have to sit, like that would have taken up most of the game. I would have been like, oh, basketball game's still going on, huh? I was actually scrolling through. I was looking up every player that Justin Fields could possibly follow. You want to know who's not included in that one? The Chicago Bears. So
that's right.
Win, lose. He's actually supposed to talk about that. We'll dive into some actual quarterbacks here, but real quick, he was actually supposed to talk about this on the 33rd team today. I think he still is. I think it's still coming out on the St. Brown's podcast. And they posted that little snippet, the teaser of him going to address it, and then immediately deleted it. Do we think he's actually going to talk about it, or you think we're just somebody called and was like, yo,
got clipped from the episode real fast?
Yeah,
real fast. Yeah,
right there. I don't know, man. I don't know. Something about we learned this past season something about following stuff on social media. Some guys just don't post anything on Instagram that has to do with football until they do. Let's talk about some real quarterback news for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, we'll say real. Real in quotation marks. We'll go when it comes to this one. Former Pittsburgh Steelers rival Chad Johnson, Ocho Cinco, Cincinnati Bengals legend, jumped on the Nightcap podcast. I think he, at this point, is co-host of the Nightcap podcast with Shannon Sharp, and talked about the Steelers quarterback situation. He tossed out Russell Wilson, and he said, look it, he's going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know, because a little birdie has told him, didn't elaborate much more, just said he has said it before, he'll say it again. A little birdie has told him that Russell Wilson is headed to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Look, there's a lot to dive into when it comes to Chad Johnson, what he says on the Nightcap podcast, but for this time, it's Russell Wilson, the Pittsburgh Steelers. You heard that. You didn't hear much more because it was a one-sentence take. There was nothing else to go with it. What were your thoughts?
My thought is, damn, who is Chad Johnson's little birdie, man? That was my biggest question, is I want to know who Chad Johnson's sources are. I mean, I don't doubt that there's still people in the league that he talks to, but how many of those people are in NFL front offices? How many of those people are with the Broncos? How many are they with the Steelers? I really, really wonder what the source is here. Your first thought is to think, would Russ work in Pittsburgh? There's a weird situation with the contract. It's I feel like from a football perspective it'd work, and then I kind of caught myself and I was like, wait, is this even real? Is this even a? So I don't know. I think my first question is just, how does Chad Johnson know this, and why would Chad Johnson know this, and why would anyone who knows for certain tell Chad Johnson this?
There's so many sides to this. So many slices of this orange right here, or this pie. I don't know why I used an orange in this analogy.
Orange has slices here.
That's true. We'll start with the Chad Johnson as a whole, and what in recent weeks, I try to listen to the Nightcap. I try to listen to every podcast. I'm a podcast guy. I don't watch television. I feel like if I'm listening to a podcast, there's a part of me that's like studying the game a little bit. I don't know. I'm weird. But I try to listen to the Nightcap podcast. A couple of weeks ago, this might have been a week ago, honestly, very recently. The last thing that came out of Chad Johnson's mouth that made national headlines on his podcast was that he was a scout for the Las Vegas Raiders. And I mean, maybe he is, maybe he's not. Nick, you got a computer in front of you. We're going to need some answers here. But just when I heard that, I was like, maybe he's not. My first reaction was, And then he says this one, and I go, okay, so if you are a scout for the Raiders, maybe this has credit. If you're not a scout for the Raiders, can we believe anything that you are officially reporting on? When it goes to both sides here, how does Russell Wilson know that he's going to the Pittsburgh? He's still on the Denver Broncos. Like, the Steelers can't call him and be like, hey, Russ, we are big fans, very interested in you. When you are a free agent, we got a contract set in stone for when you go, but we got to wait until that's tamper. You are not allowed to do that in the NFL. So how these two sides have come to an agreement well before anything has happened, I don't know, but I don't know. Maybe Russell Wilson's just like, dude, the second I hit, I'm calling Pittsburgh, and I'm saying I'm going there for free.
And I'm making sure that Chad Johnson knows.
Yeah, and
like,
Chad's
he's
the guy.
First guy that I'm.
I don't talk to any of my former teammates, Richard Sherman, Marshawn Lynch, any of those guys, Pete Carroll, none of them. Do you want to know who my boy is? Chad Johnson. I don't know about that one. Nick, is this dude a scout?
No, looking at the administration page for the Las Vegas Raiders, Chad Johnson, Chad Ochocinco, it's nowhere to be found under the scouts, the nutritionist, or even the cheerleaders. He's not there.
Nice.
I'm sure that's just a clerical error. I'm sure that's being updated, and they're just working on his staff profile right now. Yes. I'm sure it's coming. That's exactly
what I'm saying there. It takes time. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I mean, they had their former, I think it was football analyst, just recently made known that he was hired a couple weeks ago. He was on there in September. So it takes time for sides to meet, and maybe the Raiders, they do it backwards. They announce it, and then it takes a while for the website to update. Either way, Russ to Pittsburgh, this one's weird. Let me ask this. Is it weird if it wasn't Chad Johnson coming up with this report saying Russell Wilson's going to the Pittsburgh Steelers? Is the other side of it weird? Like, is it weird to just say Russ and the Steelers and maybe they mix?
No, I don't think so. I mean, veteran guy. I feel like he had some success towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
In Denver, and I think he would go to an arguably a more talented offense with some better weapons. So I think from a football perspective, it's not the craziest idea in the world. I'm not really sure. I don't think I have a good idea of how the contract situation works. Like,
I think he's guaranteed $30 million over the next 3 years, and then the Broncos eat $86 million in dead money, so maybe that goes to Russ. I don't know, but I think up front it's at least $30 million.
Right, but just like, I mean, it was $86 million of, I think, 200, and so it was like close to a $300 million contract, right? Like how, yeah. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. The price tag does look a little hefty, but I mean, that's what you pay for like premium quarterback play, especially when you have a veteran like this. Is Russ still the same guy? Like, I kind of don't know what to believe about Russ at this point, you know?
Yeah.
Like, is he 2022 Russ where he just is bad? Is he like over the hill, or is he kind of second half of 2023 Russ? I'm not really sure yet, but I don't know. I feel like he could do well in Pittsburgh. It's not the worst quarterback idea we've seen thrown out this offseason. But I just, yeah, I guess the football part of it, I'm more on board with it than I was, I think, when I first kind of heard the idea of Russ to Pittsburgh being floated. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, when Chad Johnson tosses it out there and you go, all right, well, It's a done deal. Your brain immediately starts going, all right, let's break this down here for a second. I agree. I think that once you get into the football side of it, it's not a bad move. And I think money-wise, if it works, like that's Russell Wilson has won a Super Bowl. The dude's been to 9 Pro Bowls. He's done things in the NFL where you think, okay, look, maybe you could turn it on a little bit and work with what he's got in Pittsburgh. I think the Steelers wide receiver core is better than the Broncos wide receiver core. I think the Steelers running game is stronger than the Broncos running game. I think that he's got options there. Didn't have to bounce around coaches. I mean, I feel like Sean Payton hated him from the second he walked in the door. He was like, yeah, we're done here. There's nothing worth hanging on to. I think money wise, it's gotta work out. Like what would you sign Russ to? Like if it was a clean slate, and again, the contract is weird, but I don't think the Steelers would have to grab any of the money that the Broncos lose. Would you consider Russ for like anywhere from like 30, we'll say right around that 30 million a year mark?
That is tough. I mean, obviously you're not signing him to a bunch of years, but like that feels like money I would throw at. If I'm gonna go that all in on a quarterback, I feel like a Kirk Cousins type would be a better bet, a safer bet for that kind of money. And I know Kirk would be more money, but I don't know, kind of in for a dime, in for a dollar. Like I'm not going to half-ass a massive quarterback signing like, Russell Wilson, like I don't know if that makes any sense. Like if I'm going to take a swing as big as that, I'm going to do it on a guy like Cousins who I'm maybe a little bit more sure in, even if it costs me a little bit more money.
I agree. I think if Kirk, look, if your options are Russ for 30, 35 mil and your options for Kirk are 35, 40, you're going 35, 40. Like you come up with that 10, just, change TJ Watt's signing or contract into a signing bonus. There's $10 million. You're totally fine. You're floating. No worries whatsoever. Again, and the salary cap's a myth. It's not a real thing. So I think that you could come up with this money no matter what. I think Russ is I think Mason Rudolph is still like the most realistic option. I think Russ finds himself to be a realistic option for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know how realistic, but compared to some names that we have tossed out there and will continue to toss out there, like I'm signing Russell Wilson before I'm signing definitely Ryan Tannehill. And I'm not saying that's more realistic, but I think if the Steelers are looking for, I think Ryan Tannehill has the connection to the Steelers because of Arthur Smith, but I think that that's the only connection you have. I think if you dive into the, they're trying to win a Super Bowl, Russell Wilson is, like he's 10 times a better option than Ryan Tannehill is. Or I saw Gardner Minshew the other day. And I was like, look, I love Gardner Minshew. I think that dude's awesome. Not as a football player, but just as I would show up day one. I would hope if it was Gardner Minshew, I would hope the entire offense shaved mustaches. Arthur Smith, just everybody, Najee Harris, everybody's rocking a mustache. And I just think that that's how the Steelers should play football. And I would love that. But when it comes to the play, I just don't think that like you're trying to raise the bar. That doesn't raise the bar. I think Russell Wilson does raise the bar. I think you got an opportunity there. Do you think Russell will, if he did end up in Pittsburgh, do you think that is a guy that could be the jug? You know what I mean? Like you're trying to beat Patrick Mahomes. At this point, that's the only goal of anybody in the AFC is you have to get through the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes in the AFC. And I think that's where your bar that's when everybody talks about it. When they talk about Kenny Pickett, they talk about, is Kenny Pickett going to beat Patrick Mahomes? Is Ryan Tannehill going to be able to beat Patrick Mahomes? All these guys. Is Russell Wilson a guy that maybe could?
I think he could. I don't know. That seems like kind of an unfair standard to hold anyone to when, like, Lamar Jackson's not beating Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen's not beating Patrick Mahomes. Yeah, so, like, I don't know if I'm judging it against that, but I think Russ could beat him.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think so. Because I also think part of it is, like, the Chiefs' defense was really good. I don't know. Like, he beat the Chiefs' defense, and I feel like that's the bigger question. And I think he could. I don't know. I think the combination of, Russ in Pittsburgh, like it's not Russ versus Mahomes, it would be Steelers versus Chiefs, and I think the Steelers would have a complete enough team with Russ playing quarterback to be capable of beating the Chiefs. I'll put it that way.
Would you go Russell Wilson over Mason Rudolph? We'll go Russ for eliminate money. Both of them are cheap enough where it makes sense for the Steelers.
Oh, I'd take Russ. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
me too.
I appreciate what Mason did, but I don't know. Russ seems like more of a sure thing to me.
Yes, I agree. I don't think you're taking a shot on Russ, and I also don't think I don't think there's any Russell Wilson shows up, he's your starting quarterback. Like that's all you're doing, and I think you feel good about that. So I agree. There's another name that was tossed out there that I think makes way less sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This one, like the Chad Johnson thing, hilarious. I'm glad that we got to, poke fun at it a little bit, find out that he wasn't an actual scout for the Las Vegas Raiders, at least as of not right now. Guys, we have gear, new merchandise from AST to Muth, Bleed Black and Gold, Kenny DeGeorge, and plenty of others now at our new website, blackandgoldapparel.com. And the coolest part, 50% of all profits at our store go to UPMC Children's Hospital here in Pittsburgh to make sure that we are giving back. We can't thank you guys enough, and we want to show you guys how thankful and how grateful we are for everything by making sure that we do our part to make the community here in Pittsburgh better. Go check out everything. We tried to make everything new and improved, from our designs to our quality of sweatshirts and t-shirts and everything else. Let us know and check everything out at blackandgoldapparel.com. And as always, thank you guys for everything. This other one, as soon as I heard it, I was just like, well, that makes absolutely no sense. That's just the worst possible idea that you could come up with. And I think we have named off a lot of bad ideas. This one, I think, this one's probably the worst. This one's the worst. Rich Eisen of the Rich Eisen Show, obviously, was asked where Jimmy Garoppolo could land this season because he's expected to be released by the Raiders in mid-March. His first reaction was the Pittsburgh Steelers saying, why not back up Kenny Pickett? Why not be Kenny Pickett's backup in Pittsburgh? And then said, well, he has done it before where he was brought in to be a backup, was viewed as not even close to an option to be a starter, and then won the starting job. So maybe he could, at least that's what Eisen is saying, is he could come in here with low expectations, kind of exceed those expectations, jump the gun. There's a very important piece to this entire segment here, and that is that Jimmy Garoppolo, as of right now, is not going to play the first 2 weeks of the season for violating the NFL's PED policy. So it has to be Kenny Pickett week 1 and week 2, whether Jimmy G comes in here and balls out or not. You hear Jimmy G's name, what are your first thoughts? I mean, you wrote the story yesterday when it came to the Steelers' odds, and I believe they were 2. I want to say they were the second favorite to land Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, and I didn't really get it. I don't think Jimmy G's a fit here at all.
No.
I don't think he's very good.
No.
He is certainly not. I mean, going back to our last conversation about ceiling raisers, I don't think he's a ceiling raiser at all. I don't think he gets you over the hump. His best years when he was with really good teams, and really good offenses, and had really good coaching and some great playmakers around him. They're good playmakers in Pittsburgh. They're good. It's a pretty good offense and a talented team. But clearly it can't elevate subpar quarterback play. I think that's been made pretty evident. And look, Jimmy G, you look at his numbers over the past couple of years, and it has been subpar. I mean, this was a guy who was, I believe, benched for Aiden O'Connell. Like he was
benched for Aiden O'Connell.
Right. Like, that doesn't, I mean, even as a backup, I don't think that inspires much confidence. Like, we've talked about all these different options, and like you said, this might be the worst one. Like, this is the one that where you're like, this is the first one where I think everyone is kind of like, this guy's a definitive backup. Like, this guy doesn't even really have a chance to start, Yes. And so that, in my mind, makes no sense, both for the Steelers and kind of for Garoppolo. Like, you're telling me there's no one who would even give him a chance to even compete for a starting job. Like, I don't think this makes sense either way.
No, I don't. And maybe nobody does give Jimmy G a shot to start this season, which I think could be wild, but you never know. You just never know. It just makes absolutely zero. Like, if the Steelers have laid out at least a little bit of a plan here, at least their plan A, and that is Kenny Pickett, we hope works out, but we're bringing in Mason Rudolph to make sure that we have real competition, we need somebody just in case Kenny stinks. Jimmy G doesn't bring any of that. Like, you're not bringing Jimmy G in and saying, hey, you're getting first team reps, and if you're good enough, you will start week 3. And in week 3, you better hope that Kenny Pickett wasn't good in week 1 and week 2. Like, it just doesn't. There's no part of this situation where you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers side of things and say, this makes a lot of sense. Like, this is actually what they're aiming for. It's the complete opposite of what it doesn't fit. Like, Ryan Tannehill's a better fit for the Steelers and what they're looking for than Jimmy Garoppolo, Gardner Minshew, Jacoby Brissett. Like, there's so many names. So if you wanted just somebody who was coming in here to be a backup and maybe not even be a good backup, should have just kept Mitch Trubisky and said, all right, this guy's probably going to cost too much money. He's not going to play for us. And when he does play for us, it's probably going to be disappointing, but he's got a name. So I guess that's good enough. And I think obviously Jimmy Garoppolo is talented enough to make some noise in the NFL, but just like you said, like his time in Vegas didn't go well. I think right from the jump, it didn't go well. Like I remember watching Twitter the day that he was supposed to have his introductory press conference. The dude didn't show up for like 2 hours. Media's just sitting there waiting for this guy to show up, and nobody ever found out why he wasn't on time, or the Raiders, that there was an issue there, whatever. I feel like he's not the guy that the Steelers want in that situation. I don't think it makes much sense for him.
Yeah, no. I mean, I guess we now see why you really don't think that he's a great fit. You just don't want to be sitting around 2 hours at an introductory
Could you
press
imagine?
conference.
What would we do if me and you were sitting in a press conference we're just sitting in the racquetball court in Southside waiting for Jimmy Garoppolo to come in here for 2 hours? Could you imagine how much Kaboli could talk for 2 hours? That would be 2 hours of Kaboli talking to us.
Right, I'd have to start doing laps around the indoor facility just to get some fresh air, get out of there. Yeah, it's I just don't. I mean, it doesn't really make sense from any angle. I just don't. I don't even know where this came from. Like the Steelers are just. I mean, this is kind of the nature of the beast. Like,
yeah,
when you kind of have a quarterback opening, you get linked to just about every quarterback that's available or could possibly be available. But I don't see where Jimmy Garoppolo provides any kind of value beyond some veteran leadership, I guess. But like,
dude, what
honestly,
type of
who
veteran
cares?
leadership? Yeah, like
right,
what
like
do you
who
bring?
cares?
Yeah,
right, and like who kind of cares? Like I don't know. This team has veterans. I want someone who's good. I don't really care about leadership at this point.
That's what I'm saying. Kenny's a third. If Kenny's your guy, he's a third year starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like he's a veteran. You know, he's 26 years old at this point. Like the dude is a veteran. That's it. He's the leader of your team. Should be a captain. Like you don't need a veteran backup. You know, it doesn't make any sense. But I'm glad that you said the nature of the beast, because that is exactly what's happening now, is that every quarterback who pops up and could be available, and literally the second they are named, oh, well, the Pittsburgh Steelers, that could be an option for the Pittsburgh Steelers, we immediately get an email that's just like, hey, this one's for you. Jimmy Garoppolo, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Patrick Mahomes, Gardner Minshew, Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett, and Mason Rudolph, all favorites to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh Steelers are the favorites to land all of these guys, and that will continue to happen with every single name that pops up, which brings the question that I don't think we have addressed really this offseason. We've talked a lot about Kenny Pickett. We talked a lot about Mason Rudolph and our thoughts on him, but we haven't really answered the question. And I don't think a lot of people have answered the question that I think is very important at this time in the offseason, especially when it's so early. Like we haven't gone to the combine. This is just all assumption. This is just every craze we could possibly come up with. We are talking about, and every media outlet is talking about, every fan is talking about. And that is Kenny Pickett getting a fair shot right now? Like, are we completely blowing past Kenny Pickett and any potential that he has, and the possibility that he could turn out to be good? And, you know, do you look at Kenny Pickett and nobody's talking about, does he deserve a third shot? He's 14-10 as a starter. Like, is it time to give up? Is it not time to give up? Like, I don't think that question's really been tossed out there. I think it's all just, what are the alternatives? When you look at Kenny Pickett, when you look at everything that's going on right now, do you think Kenny's kind of getting the fair hand in this? And do you look at him as a guy that maybe it is time to just acknowledge he does deserve a third shot, or does he not deserve a third shot?
I think Kenny's getting exactly what he deserves. I don't know, that sounds a little harsh, but like I think Kenny's going to go into training camp with as much of an opportunity as anyone to play for this starting job. Like, he was a first-round draft pick. Like, they're showing some faith in him, showing some, I don't know, I don't know what the exact word is, but I think by sticking with them to a certain extent and giving him a chance, I mean, the Steelers are just kind of reflecting that, look, this is one of our first-round picks from really recently. We're going to keep some confidence in him for a while. But I think it's been pretty clear from the end of the season that this is kind of the last stand, you know, like this is kind of make or break for him. And I think that's completely fair. And I know, like, we are talking about the alternatives a lot more than we're talking about what kind of potential Kenny has to be good this season. But I think that's because Kenny's the only quarterback on the roster. They're going to get new guys pretty much no matter what, whether or not Kenny ends up playing really well or not, or whether they believe Kenny will play well or not. This is just what happens when you lose. Well, you haven't lost 2 quarterbacks yet, but you only have one under. Like, you literally only have one under contract for 2024. So you're going to need someone. You might as well bring in someone who can possibly give you starter reps, who can possibly be a starter for you. So Kenny's just kind of a known commodity at this point, and we're just kind of no conversation you have about Kenny is going to be very fruitful until August, until we actually see him take the field and we see him throw a little bit more, or we see him work in this new offense. It's just going to be a while before we can have a conversation about Kenny that's new, or that we have some new data to work off of.
I agree. I look at Kenny Pickett right now, and I just say, when it comes to trying to toss out Justin Fields and Russell Wilson and Kirk Cousins and all these names, it's just because it's where the Steelers are more than where Kenny Pickett is. I think if the Steelers were in a bad spot and they were still developing, and you kind of had to talk them up a little bit, you would look at Kenny Pickett and say, why would you not give him a third opportunity? That just makes a lot of sense. But you kind of looked at last season and you said immediately, there are 2 major flaws here that are really holding the Steelers back. And that is Matt Canada and the quarterback play. And you hoped that Kenny Pickett improved after Matt Canada left. That wasn't the case, and I don't blame Kenny for that.
I mean, he really only got 1 game post Canada. I mean, 1.5 usually.
Yeah.
He had the Bengals game, and then
yeah, and then he got hurt. And even so, the Bengals game, he looked good, but you got Eddie Faulkner and Mike Sullivan as your co-offensive coordinator. Like, you're not, I don't think he was I don't think he's ever had I don't think we could ever move on from the fact that he's never had a good OC. And I think we use that as excuses for other players, like Justin Fields, for example. But I think that, again, where the Steelers are, there is an actual sense of urgency. There is an actual sense of, this team can be really good, but you need a quarterback. And if you were missing a center or a right tackle or a wide receiver or an inside linebacker or whatever, you could look at those positions and say, well, you have Spencer Anderson, which I don't know if you saw, because Spencer Anderson, Ray Fittipaldo, Post-Gazette, said that he's a candidate to start at right tackle. Shout out your boy right there. If you looked at other positions and said that is our only position to need, but we have a Spencer Anderson, a Mark Robinson, a Corey Trice, whoever, somebody who, and say these guys were drafted higher, but you have somebody like that where they are coming along, but they're not, there's still some hiccups here. You look at it and you say, all right, well, you give him one more year because you work well, but you could win a Super Bowl with a bad right tackle. You could win a Super Bowl with a bad inside linebacker or a bad safety or a bad corner. You could not, and it has never happened, win a Super Bowl with a bad quarterback. And there have been some quarterbacks, but you cannot, you just can't win a Super Bowl in today's day and age with a bad quarterback, especially when you got the Kansas City Chiefs and all the things that they do, and you just never know when you're going to be in a gunfight and you're going to have to shoot out with guys like Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes or the 49ers or whoever. You just don't know when that's going to happen. So I think the position just makes that sense of urgency so much higher that, yeah, it's a quarterback. You judge them differently and you judge them a lot more harshly, but that's just the nature of the game. That's where Kenny Pickett's been, and that's where he is right now.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point about just the kind of quarterbacks you're going up against. There's just levels to it, there are plenty of guys who can maybe lead you to a playoff spot, who can maybe win you a game in the playoffs. There are not many that can take you to a conference championship, that can take you to a Super Bowl, and obviously can win a Super Bowl for you. I mean, you look at the quarterbacks in recent years that have won Super Bowls. You go back the last 10 years, it's Mahomes, it's Brady, it's Peyton Manning, it's
Big Ben.
Yeah, Big Ben. I mean, did he win one in the last 10 years?
Oh, no, he has not. No, he has not.
Right, it's a Russell Wilson. It's guys who are, I would say pretty universally, all of those guys are going to go to the Hall of Fame. That's I don't think that's that hot of a take there. It's just different. It is tough to win a Super Bowl, and it's tough to be a Super Bowl winning quarterback. So just, if that's your goal, you got to aim high, right? That sounds kind of self-explanatory, but it just takes a really elite player to win a Super Bowl in this day and age as a quarterback and to lead a team to a Super Bowl and then eventually win one. So that's why I think that's part of why Kenny Pickett's getting held to a pretty high standard. It's just because this team's goals are high. And
Yes.
that's tough. That's tough for a guy like Kenny to walk into, especially when like you said, the situation has been so unstable for most of his career, but that's like the situation he's in. It's how he's going to get judged, and this team has high expectations, so he's got to either live up to them or he can't be a part of their future.
I agree. And the window doesn't stay open very long, like the window of opportunity closes quickly in the NFL, and you just don't have time to mess around with it. And if this was 2 years ago and they just brought in Arthur Smith and you were like, oh man, or even last year, they just brought in Arthur Smith, you'd say, this is Kenny's job. You're excited about it. This year, it's like, dude, you saw how good this team could be with Mason Rudolph. How good could it be if you brought in a crazy good quarterback and had a competent offensive coordinator? And because of those questions, you could either take a risk or you can't take a risk. And it sounds like the Pittsburgh Steelers want to take a bit of a risk on Kenny Pickett, and that's their decision. But when it comes to the conversation being had outside of the organization, I think that you acknowledge more strongly that the risk is pretty high. Like it's not a low risk for how good this team could possibly be. And the goal is Super Bowl, and fans are getting real fed up with not winning the Super Bowl. So that's just where they are. There'll be plenty more. And the combine next week, the draft coming up, free agency is 3 weeks away, something like that. That's wild. And I saw yesterday, I was actually listening, shout out Rich Eisen and Jimmy G. He mentioned that he believes Justin Fields will get traded right at the beginning of free agency. And I agreed with him. I think that could be the window of opportunity for a guy like that, just because you want to trade him before really everybody gets going. If you're the Chicago Bears, that's peak time right there to say, we're not going to let everybody fill up on the Russell Wilsons and the Kirk Cousins and the Mason Rudolphs. We're going to send our quarterback somewhere. It could be rather quickly that the trade market is red hot for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So plenty of action for right now. We'll keep it trucking, but Chad Johnson, man, if you're right, we will have a whole podcast where we apologize to you. So that's on us. With that said, we're heading out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your audio podcasts. We are really pushing those audio downloads, so we greatly appreciate all the reviews you leave for us on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts. Check all our work out at allsteelers.com and our pick coverage out at InsideThePanthers.com. We will be back on Friday. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.